I used to believe silence meant safety. If I didn't speak too much, didn't ask for too much, didn't expect too much, then nothing could really hurt me. That was the rule I learned growing up. In my family, attention was a currency, and I never seemed to have enough to spend. I was always there, always present, but somehow invisible at the same time. People noticed me only when they needed something done quietly, efficiently, without praise, and I accepted that role because I thought that was all I deserved. My name is Sophie, and for most of my life, I was told directly and indirectly that I would inherit nothing, not money, not property, not even a place in the family story. I didn't hear it once, I heard it repeatedly over the years. In small comments that were easy to dismiss if you wanted to pretend everything was normal. Don't get your hopes up. You know how these things work. Your brother needs stability more than you do. Each sentence landed softly, but together they built something heavy inside me, a quiet understanding that whatever future existed for this family, it wasn't meant to include me in any meaningful way. I remember the night it finally broke open, not with shouting, not with confrontation, but with a simple notification on my phone. It was late, the kind of late where your thoughts get louder because the world finally shuts up. I was sitting on the edge of my bed in my small apartment, the one I could barely afford, staring at the wall and replaying the same worries I replayed every night. Rent, work, bills, how long I could keep pretending I wasn't exhausted. My phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, because when you grow up learning disappointment, hope starts to feel dangerous. You stop reaching for things that might lift you up, because falling back down hurts more than staying low. But something made me look. It wasn't a message from family. It wasn't a friend. It was an email, plain, professional, no emotion in the subject line, just my name and a reference number. At first, I thought it was a mistake, or spam, or one of those scams that try to scare you into responding. I almost deleted it. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I opened it, and that was the moment my life quietly split into before and after. The email said they had been trying to contact me for some time. It said there was an account registered under my name. It said the word inheritance in a way that felt unreal, like it belonged to someone else's story. And then I saw the amount, £1.8 million. I stared at the screen so long my eyes started to hurt. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake right away. My body didn't know how to react, because nothing like this had ever been meant for me. I had spent years adjusting my expectations downward, shrinking my dreams so they wouldn't get crushed. There was no space inside me for something this big. My first thought wasn't happiness. It was fear. Because if this was real, then something else had to be true too. Something I wasn't ready to face yet. I read the email again, slowly, every word, every line. The account had been created years ago. The funds had been placed into a trust. My name was the sole beneficiary. Sole beneficiary. I whispered the words out loud, just to hear them exist in the room with me. My grandmother's name appeared on the documents. And suddenly, my chest felt tight. My grandmother was the only person in my family who ever looked at me like I mattered without conditions. She never said it directly. She didn't need to. It was in the way she listened, the way she asked real questions and waited for real answers, the way she never compared me to anyone else. When she got sick, I wasn't told right away. I found out by accident through a neighbor who assumed I already knew. By the time I visited, things were already bad. She smiled when she saw me, but there was something in her eyes that felt like goodbye. After she passed, my family handled everything quickly. Papers were signed, meetings were held, decisions were made, and when I asked carefully, quietly, if there was anything I needed to know, my father looked at me with that familiar expression, the one that said I was being inconvenient. She didn't leave you anything, Sophie, he said. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I believed him, because I had been trained to believe him. Now, sitting alone with my phone glowing in the dark, That memory felt different, sharper, heavier, like a lie that had been waiting patiently for me to notice it. I didn't call anyone that night. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I just sat there, breathing slowly, feeling something inside me rearrange itself. If this money was real, then someone had lied. And not just casually, deliberately. The next few days passed in a blur. I contacted the institution listed in the email. I expected confusion, delays, questions. Instead, everything moved smoothly. They confirmed my identity. They confirmed the trust. They confirmed the amount. They confirmed that attempts had been made to reach me before. Letters sent to an old address. Calls redirected. Messages unanswered. Blocked. Intercepted. I felt sick. Each confirmation peeled back another layer of my life and showed me how carefully managed my ignorance had been. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't an oversight. This was a decision. Someone had decided I didn't deserve to know. I asked for the documents, all of them. I needed to see it in writing, in ink, in something that couldn't be dismissed as a misunderstanding or a technical error. When the files arrived, I read them alone at my kitchen table, page after page. Dates, signatures, instructions. My grandmother had been clear. The trust was mine. And then I reached the clause that made my breath catch. She had written that the funds were to be released only when I became aware of them on my own, not when my parents told me, not when my brother approved. On my own. As if she knew. As if she had seen exactly how this would play out. Tears blurred the words. And for the first time since the email arrived, I cried, not because of the money, but because someone had seen me. Someone had understood the shape of my silence and had planned for it. My grandmother hadn't just left me money. She had left me the truth. And the truth was heavier than I expected. I thought about all the times I struggled while my family talked about tight finances and shared burdens. I thought about the way decisions were made without me, about me, for me. I thought about the nights I lay awake wondering what I had done wrong to deserve so little. It wasn't me. It had never been me. That realization didn't make me feel powerful right away. It made me angry, deeply, quietly angry. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that settles and waits. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Because I wanted to understand everything first. I wanted to know how far the lie went, how many people were involved, how long they had been comfortable pretending I didn't exist in the future they were building. So I stayed silent. I went to work. I smiled when required. I answered messages with the same polite distance I always had, and inside, I started preparing, not for revenge in the way people imagine it, not for shouting or public scenes or dramatic accusations. I prepared for clarity. I met with a legal advisor, then another. I asked questions. I listened. I learned. Every conversation confirmed the same thing. The money was legally mine, and it always had been. There was nothing my family could do to change that now. The only question left was what I was going to do with the truth. At night, I replayed conversations from my childhood. Moments that had felt small at the time, but now glowed with meaning. The way my grandmother would squeeze my hand when others talk over me. The way she once said, "You're stronger than they think," without explaining who they were. I understood now. She had been talking about all of them. And maybe she had been talking about me too. By the time I decided to invite my family to dinner, I felt calm, not numb, calm. The kind of calm that comes after something inside you has already snapped and settled into a new shape. They accepted the invitation with hesitation, confusion, curiosity. My father asked if everything was okay. I told him it was. And for the first time in my life, that was true. I wasn't okay in the way they expected. I wasn't small anymore. I wasn't waiting for permission. I was standing at the edge of something irreversible, and they had no idea what was coming. After I sent the dinner invitation, something strange happened inside me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of their reactions. I wasn't rehearsing explanations or preparing apologies. I wasn't wondering how to make myself smaller so the moment would pass without conflict. Instead, I felt steady, quietly alert, like someone who had been standing in the rain for years and had finally stepped under a roof. The days leading up to the dinner moved slowly. Every hour felt longer than the last. But not because I was anxious. It was because my mind kept returning to memories I had ignored for years, moments that now made sense in a way they never had before. I remembered how, when I was younger, family conversations would stop the moment I entered the room. How laughter softened into politeness. How decisions about holidays, finances, and plans were always made somewhere else. And I was informed later, if at all. At the time, I told myself I was imagining it, that I was too sensitive, that it wasn't personal, but it was personal. It had always been personal. When I was in my early 20s and struggling to pay for my studies, I asked my parents for help just once. I didn't demand anything. I didn't cry. I simply asked if there was any support available. My father sighed heavily, as if my question was an inconvenience he had been expecting. "We can't afford to carry everyone," he said. "You'll have to learn how to stand on your own." I believed him then. Meanwhile, my brother never seemed to worry about money. New opportunities appeared for him effortlessly. A car, a loan, a safety net I was told didn't exist. Now I knew it did exist. It just wasn't meant for me. The legal meetings continued quietly. I signed documents, verified identities, confirmed transfers. Each step felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. The number never felt real to me. Even when it officially moved into an account I controlled, it didn't feel like money. It felt like evidence. Proof that I hadn't been wrong all these years to feel excluded. Proof that my discomfort hadn't been imagination. Proof that love, in my family, had always been conditional. And I had failed the conditions simply by being myself. The night of the dinner arrived sooner than I expected. I chose a restaurant that was neutral, not too fancy, not too casual, somewhere public enough to keep emotions contained, but private enough for real conversation. I arrived early and sat alone for a few minutes, watching other people talk, laugh, argue, live their normal lives. I wonder how many of them were carrying secrets like mine. My family arrived together. That alone was telling. They always arrived together, a unit. I stood when they approached the table, greeted them politely, and sat back down. No hugs. Just polite smiles. We talked about nothing at first. Work, traffic, the weather. My brother talked about his plans, his goals, his future, the way he always did, confident, uninterrupted. My parents listened attentively, asked questions, offered advice. I listened quietly, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I was observing. I was watching how easily the old patterns slipped back into place, how natural it felt for them to speak over me, how comfortable they were assuming I would stay silent. At some point, my mother asked me how work was going. Her tone was careful, almost formal. I answered honestly, but briefly. She nodded, as if confirming something she already believed. And then the moment arrived. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. It came in a pause, a space between sentences where no one spoke, a breath that hung in the air. "I know about the inheritance," I said. The words were calm, measured, almost gentle, but the effect was immediate. My father froze. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. My mother blinked too many times, too quickly. My brother leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression closing off. For a second, no one spoke. Then my father laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "What inheritance?" he asked. "You must be confused." I expected that response. I reached into my bag and placed the documents on the table, slowly, one by one. I didn't slide them toward him aggressively. I didn't push them into his space. I simply let them exist between us. Silence returned. This time, heavier. My mother picked up one of the pages and skimmed it. Her hands trembled slightly. My brother stared at the table. My father's jaw tightened. "You weren't supposed to find out like this," my mother said finally. That sentence stayed with me. Not you shouldn't have found out. Not this isn't. True. Just not like this. So there was a way you expected me to find out. I asked. No one answered. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I asked questions the way I had always wanted to, but never dared to. How long did you know? Why didn't you tell me? What did you think would happen? My father rubbed his temples. We were protecting you, he said. You wouldn't have known how to handle the kind of responsibility. I almost smiled, because that was the same argument he used my entire life, that I was too fragile, too emotional, too weak. Yet I was the one who survived without help. I was the one who learned how to stand alone. You decided for me, I said, again. My brother finally spoke. You're overreacting. It's not like we took anything from you. That was the moment something inside me hardened. You took my choices, I said. You took my truth. You took years of my life where I thought I was unwanted, unsupported, and alone. That matters. He looked away. They apologized, in fragments, in pieces, carefully. Each apology was followed by an explanation, a justification, a reason why it wasn't really their fault. I listened, and I realized something important. They weren't sorry for what they had done. They were sorry they had been exposed. When the dinner ended, we stood awkwardly by the table. My mother asked if we could talk again soon. My father said we should move forward. My brother said nothing. I nodded politely, and I walked away. That night, I went home and slept better than I had in years. Not because everything was resolved, but because I finally understood where I stood. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. In the weeks that followed, the messages started. Calls, emails, invitations, attempts to reconnect. Some were warm. Some were cautious. Some were desperate. I responded to none of them. Instead, I focused on building a life that didn't revolve around earning approval or proving worth. I paid off debts quietly. I invested thoughtfully. I moved into a home that felt like mine. Not temporary, not borrowed, not fragile. Money didn't change who I was, but it changed what I could leave behind. And the biggest thing I left behind was the version of myself that believed silence was the price of belonging. Because I finally understood something my grandmother had known all along. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's the moment you realize you were never wrong for wanting more. After that dinner, people expected something dramatic to happen. A final argument, a public fallout, a clear ending that everyone could understand and label. But life doesn't always give you those clean moments. Sometimes the real consequences arrive quietly, spreading slowly through your days until you realize everything has changed. At first, I thought the silence from my family would bring relief. And it did, for a while. I woke up without that familiar weight in my chest, the one that came from anticipating their disappointment before it even happened. I made choices without wondering how they would react. I spent money without guilt, not recklessly, but without that voice telling me I didn't deserve comfort. But then something unexpected happened. I started to grieve, not for the family I had lost, but for the family I never truly had, for the years I spent trying to earn a place that was never meant to be shared equally, for the child I used to be, who believed love was something you could earn by being quiet enough. That grief arrived in small moments, when I bought furniture and had no one to ask for advice, when I cooked meals that felt too big for one person, when I realized that even now, part of me expected someone to tell me I was doing life wrong. Healing, I learned, isn't a straight line. It doesn't move forward at the pace you want. Some days, I felt strong and certain. Other days, I felt like I was standing in the ruins of something invisible, trying to understand. What had collapsed. My family didn't disappear completely. They hovered at the edges of my life, unsure how to re-enter it. My mother sent messages that sounded careful, edited, as if every word had been reviewed before being sent. My father sent nothing at all. My brother sent one message, months later, asking if we could put things behind us. I didn't reply, not because I wanted to punish them, but because I didn't know how to explain that there was nothing to go back to. The truth was, even if the money had never existed, the damage already had. The inheritance had simply revealed it. It had pulled the curtain back and forced everyone to see what had always been there. I started therapy around that time, not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to understand myself without the noise of my family's expectations. I wanted to hear my own thoughts clearly for once. In those sessions, I talked about my grandmother more than anyone else, about the way she listened, about the way she trusted me, about the quiet strength she carried without ever needing to prove it. My therapist asked me once why I thought my grandmother had set the trust up the way she did. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, because she knew they wouldn't let me have it otherwise, and she wanted to make sure I learned the truth myself. Saying it out loud made something settle inside me. My grandmother hadn't just protected my future. She had protected my agency. That realization changed how I saw everything: my career, my friendships, my boundaries. I stopped over-explaining. I stopped apologizing for existing. I stopped chasing relationships that required me to disappear to be tolerated. I noticed how often I had accepted less, not because I wanted to, but because it felt familiar. Familiar doesn't mean safe. It just means known. As months passed, my life slowly expanded, not in dramatic ways, but in steady, meaningful ones. I traveled alone for the first time and discovered I liked my own company. I took risks at work I would have been too afraid to take before. I spoke up when something didn't sit right, even if my voice shook. I began to understand that confidence isn't loud. It's quiet, consistent self-trust. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, my mother's handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the table for hours, like a test I wasn't sure I wanted to take. When I finally opened it, her words were softer than I expected. She talked about regret, about fear, about how family dynamics become habits you stop questioning. She said she wished she had been braver. She said she missed me. I believed she meant it. But I also knew that missing someone isn't the same as changing. I wrote back, not immediately, and not with anger. I wrote honestly. I told her I needed distance, that trust, once broken, doesn't return just because time has passed, that I wasn't punishing anyone, I was protecting myself. I didn't receive a reply, and, for the first time, that didn't hurt, because I had learned something crucial. Closure doesn't require agreement. It doesn't require understanding from the other side. Sometimes, closure is simply the moment you stop waiting for people to become who they never were. The money continued to sit quietly in the background of my life. I used it responsibly. Thoughtfully, I supported causes my grandmother had cared about. I created a scholarship in her name, one that helped young women who had grown up feeling unseen. That felt right. It felt like continuing a conversation she and I had never finished. Occasionally, I wondered what my family thought about all of this, whether they talked about me, whether they resented me, whether they regretted their choices. Then I realized something else. It didn't matter. Their thoughts no longer shaped my reality. One evening, while sorting through old boxes, I found her photo of my grandmother and me. I was young, sitting beside her, looking serious while she smiled softly at the camera. On the back, in faded ink, she had written my name. Just my name. No comparison, no conditions. I placed the photo on my shelf, where I could see it every day, because it reminded me of who I was before I learned to shrink, and who I had finally allowed myself to become. The truth had cost me a family, but it had given me myself, and that felt like a fair exchange. Time has a way of testing the decisions you make in moments of clarity. Long after the emotions settle and the conversations fade, you're left alone with the results. For me, that time came quietly, in ordinary days that no longer revolved around waiting for someone else's approval. I built routines that belonged only to me. Morning walks without checking my phone. Evenings where silence felt peaceful instead of lonely. I started noticing how often I smiled for no reason at all. How my shoulders no longer tensed when my phone rang. How my thoughts didn't immediately drift toward what my family might think. But healing doesn't erase the past. It reorganizes it. There were moments when the old doubts crept back in. Moments when I wondered if I had been too harsh. If distance was a mistake. If forgiveness meant letting people back into your life even when they hadn't truly changed. Those questions usually came late at night. And every time they did, I reminded myself of something important. I didn't walk away because of one lie. I walked away because of a lifetime of choices that showed me exactly where I stood. One afternoon, nearly a year after the dinner, my father called. It was the first time he had reached out directly since everything happened. I stared at the phone as it rang, feeling that familiar pull toward obligation. The part of me that had been trained to answer, to explain, to soften things, I let it ring out. He left a voicemail. His voice sounded older, slower. He talked about health issues, about stress, about how families should stick together. He never mentioned the inheritance, never mentioned the lie. He ended the message by saying, "I hope you'll do the right thing." I listened to it twice, and then I deleted it. Because the right thing had always meant doing what made them comfortable, even if it cost me everything. I wasn't willing to pay that price anymore. Around that same time, my brother tried again. He showed up at my door unexpectedly. I hadn't given him my address, but he had found it anyway. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, something surprising happened. I felt nothing. No anger, no fear, no guilt. Just distance. He talked quickly, nervously, as if filling the silence would prevent me from closing the door. He said he had been under pressure, that our parents had made the decisions, that he hadn't wanted to get involved. I listened, without interrupting. Then I told him the truth. "You benefited from their decisions," I said. "You didn't question them because they worked in your favor." He didn't deny it. That was enough. I told him I wished him well, but that my life no longer had space for relationships built on convenience. He looked at me for a long moment, like he was trying to recognize someone he thought he knew. Then he left, and I closed the door gently behind him. That was the last direct contact I had with my family. After that, something settled inside me permanently, a sense of finality that didn't feel dramatic, just complete. I stopped checking for messages that weren't coming. I stopped wondering what I would say if they reached out again. I had said everything that mattered. With time, the inheritance stopped feeling like an event and started feeling like a tool, a resource I used intentionally, without guilt or apology. I invested in long-term security, but I also invested in joy, experiences I had denied myself because I was always saving for emergencies, always bracing for things to fall apart. I learned that stability changes how you move through the world. It doesn't make life perfect, but it gives you room to breathe, room to choose, room to say no without fear. I volunteered more. I mentored young women who reminded me of myself, quiet, capable, overlooked. I watched them slowly realize they didn't need permission to take up space. Every time that happened, it felt like honoring my grandmother in a way words never could. There was one final thing I did that closed the circle for me. I visited my grandmother's grave alone. I hadn't been back since the funeral. At the time, it felt too heavy, too complicated. Now, it felt necessary. I stood there and told her everything. About the email, the dinner, the distance, the life I was building. I thanked her not just for the money, but for believing in me enough to protect me from the truth until I was strong enough to face it. I realized then that she hadn't been trying to punish my family. She had been preparing me to choose myself without guilt, preparing me to walk away without hatred, preparing me to understand that love doesn't require silence. As I walked away, I felt lighter than I ever had, not because the past no longer existed, but because it no longer controlled me. I don't tell this story because of the money. I tell it because betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the people who assume you'll never question them, who believe your silence means consent, who think you won't notice what's missing. And sometimes, justice doesn't arrive with noise or revenge or destruction. Sometimes it arrives quietly. In an email. In a truth uncovered. In a life rebuilt without apology. These days, my life is quiet in the best possible way. Not empty, not lonely, just steady. I wake up without dread sitting on my chest. I make plans without calculating who might disapprove. I move through my days with a sense of ownership I never had before, as if my life finally belongs to me, and not to a version of myself I created to survive someone else's expectations. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how things ended with my family. They expect a dramatic answer. Anger, sadness, resentment. But the truth is simpler than that. Regret only comes when you believe there was another version of the story that could have existed if you had tried harder. I tried hard enough for a lifetime. What ended wasn't a relationship built on honesty. It was an illusion built on my silence. I still think about my grandmother often. I think about how carefully she must have planned everything, how much restraint it must have taken to stay quiet, to let events unfold as they did, knowing the truth would hurt me, but also knowing it would free me. She understood something that took me years to learn. Protection doesn't always look like comfort. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like trust in someone's strength. Even before they recognize it themselves, the money didn't give me confidence. It didn't heal my past. It didn't replace what I lost. What it gave me was space. Space to see clearly. Space to step back and ask myself what kind of life I actually wanted to live when no one was watching, judging, or deciding for me. And in that space, I chose peace. I chose relationships where I didn't have to explain my worth. I chose work that didn't drain me just to prove I was capable. I chose a future where my voice mattered because I decided it did. If you're listening to this and something in my story feels familiar, I want you to hear this clearly. If you've been made to feel invisible, it doesn't mean you are. If you've been told to wait, to be patient, to accept less, it doesn't mean that's all you deserve. And if the truth in your life feels delayed, that doesn't mean it won't come. Sometimes the truth arrives quietly when you're finally ready to hear it. And when it does, you don't owe anyone the version of yourself that survived their choices. You're allowed to grow beyond it. You're allowed to choose yourself. You're allowed to walk away without carrying guilt that was never yours to begin with. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of something you've lived through or are still trying to understand, I hope you'll take a moment to acknowledge your own strength. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, shared, and talked about, then support the channel by liking this video, sharing it with someone who might need it, and subscribing so you don't miss future stories like this one. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying until the end. And thank you for being part of a community that understands that sometimes the strongest revenge is simply living a life built on truth.